Hello, and welcome to Wrong Place, Wrong Crime, Season 1. Here in Season 1, we're looking at the infamous yogurt shop murders. And in the first 4 episodes, we've reviewed the activities of the 4 girls that night, December 6, 1991. We've analyzed the crime scene. We've described what witnesses saw, and we've even touched on the last minutes in the yogurt shop. Here in episode 5, I will begin to give my theory on who I believe was one of the 2 men in that yogurt shop. A man who personifies evil. Now, I've heard it said before, there are a lot of bad people in this world, but truly only a few evil ones. Now, Webster defines evil as morally reprehensible and wicked. And I made the statement in episode 4 that these murders were an act of pure evil. And if you've listened to episode 4, you know the content was pretty rough, and you know that those last 40 minutes were nothing but evil. They could have only been carried out by men of pure evil who had no value for human life, who were sick and twisted men, who were sexual deviants. These men had learned from being caught in previous crimes they had committed and were determined not to leave any evidence that could get them caught at that crime. These men had killed before, and they probably killed again. When we think of evil, we think of people like John Wayne Gacy, Richard Ramirez, and Ted Bundy. These were men who killed for a variety of reasons. But when you hear their name, you think of a time, period, an era where their reign of terror lasted until they were caught. Gacy, it was in Chicago in the late 70s. Ramirez, it was Los Angeles in 1984. And Bundy, it was in the 70s and 80s in Washington, Colorado, and then in Florida. Wherever Bundy went, girls went missing and ended up dead. Wherever someone who truly evil goes, heinous crimes always follow. And this brings us to the premise of my theory on who I believe was one of the 2 men in that yogurt shop that night. His name, Kenneth Allen McDuff. The story of Kenneth Allen McDuff begins in August of 1966. The Saturday, August the 6th, 1966. It's 5 days after the Austin Clock Tower shooting, and Roydell Green and Kenneth Allen McDuff are traveling to Fort Worth from Rosebud, Texas, a small town outside of the Waco area. They're traveling to Fort Worth, in the words of McDuff, for what he called a sexcapade, which for him, that meant finding a lady, violating that lady, and then killing her. After drinking in Fort Worth, the 2 men made their way to Everman. They rode around Everman until McDuff got the idea that there may be girls at the high school on that Saturday night. Arriving at the high school and going to the baseball field in the back of the school, McDuff spotted a 1955 Ford. McDuff parked his Dodge about 150 yards away from the Ford and walked up to the car. Now, Roydell had stopped short of the car, but McDuff went to the car where he found the 3 high school students, Robert Brand, Marcus Dunham, and Edna Lewis Sullivan. McDuff ordered all 3 of the students out of the car at gunpoint. McDuff took the boys' wallets and put all of the 3 kids in the trunk. Roydell then drove the Dodge, and McDuff drove the students' Ford. The men drove about 15 miles south outside of Everman to an isolated area. McDuff had been previously jailed for burglary, and he was not going to make any mistakes with evidence and unfortunately witnesses. McDuff, after Porky, ordered Edna to the trunk of Ford and had Roy Dale put her in the trunk of their Dodge. As Roy Dale did what he was told, he heard 6 gunshots. McDuff had shot each of the boys 3 times in the head. At McDuff's orders, Roy Dale then wiped down the Ford for fingerprints and then had him even scuffle the ground where they had driven in the Dodge. That way they would not leave any tire marks. 2 men then drove 11 more miles south to Eagan, Texas, where they again stopped in an isolated area. This time, Edna was taken out of the trunk, moved to the back seat, forced to remove her clothes, and was violated by McDuff and Roy Dale numerous times. They then drove the car even further south to another isolated area, where Edna was forced to sit in front of the car. McDuff then grabbed a broomstick from the back of the Dodge and proceeded to choke Edna to death. McDuff supposedly later made the comment, "It was like killing a possum." Both men then carried Edna's lifeless body and dumped it over a barbed wire fence. Not before McDuff stole Edna's German cross necklace from around her neck. McDuff was going to shoot Edna in the head, but he had used all the ammunition on Robert and Marcus. The 2 men, on their way back to Roy Dale's house in Marlin, dumped the used shells, the broomstick. They buried the boys' wallets near a stop sign they stopped at, and they threw the bloody clothes on a roof of a gas station that they stopped at. The next day, after they woke up, they buried the gun, and they went and thoroughly washed the Dodge of any hair fibers or blood. The boys and the Ford were found early Sunday morning as a fisherman had come on that desolate road and found the Ford where it had been left. A massive search was then started, of course, looking for Edna on that Sunday morning, with over 2,000 people joining in the search by Monday. Now, after Roy Dale had left Kenneth McDuff and had joined a friend, by mid-afternoon, the guilt was more than he could take, especially after Roy Dale had heard the news come across the radio. He broke down and confessed to his friend about what had happened the night before and the boys' murders and the girls' murder. McDuff would later be arrested that same night, and Roy Dale go and show police the evidence that had been left behind and even help the searchers eventually find the body of Edna. McDuff became known, and these killings became known as the Broomstick Murders. 3 months later, on November the 15th, 1966, McDuff was found guilty of the murder of the boys, and he was sentenced to death. McDuff's execution, unfortunately, was stayed a number of times between 1966 and 1972. And in 1972, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the death penalty illegal for cruel and unusual punishment, McDuff's death sentence was reduced to life in prison. 15 years later, in 1987, a Texas judge by the name of William Wayne Justice, ironic with the name Justice, from Tyler, Texas, ruled prison system here in Texas had violated the inmates' rights through overcrowding and poor medical care. As a result of his rulings, Texas prisons were limited to 50,000 prisoners, and local jails began to overflow. The only answer for this problem was parole. Parole for the prisoners in the Texas prisons. To lower the prison numbers, parole became the only answer. And without much spectacle, a 3-man parole board, with consent from 2 of the 3, began releasing 750 prisoners a week, which was close to 36,000 prisoners in that 1 year. So one unelected judge's ruling, and the Texas governor at the time, Bill Clements, not wanting to spend Texas tax dollars on building more prisons, dangerous criminals were put back on the street in an alarming rate. McDuff, after a number of failed parole hearings during the 1980s, Kenneth Allen McDuff, on September the 14th, 1989, with the approval of Chris Mealy and James Granberry, 2 of the 3 parole board members, voted to approve the release of Kenneth Allen McDuff. McDuff had served only 23 years for the Broomstick murders and had even survived death row. We will continue in episode 6 with what McDuff did upon his release from prison and how women mysteriously began come up missing or dead wherever he went. Please like and subscribe. And for those of you who have subscribed, and for those of you who are about to subscribe, make sure you on your subscriptions have turned to public, as I will be doing a random award for one lucky subscriber when subscriptions reach 100. Again, like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. Wrong place, wrong time.